Good evening. This is going to be a second video today because this is a subject that I want to get to while it's still fairly relevant, and it's actually been on my mind since I saw this movie like 2 nights ago. First off, I do want to give a warning. There are going to be spoilers in this, so if you have not seen the movie, do not watch this video. I'm not going to give spoiler warnings each time before I bring up a spoiler, so just don't watch this video until you've seen the movie. But anyway, this is a... Now I'm going to be talking about a little bit more specific topics on this, having to do with this movie and the storytelling that was done in this movie, that if it were a book, how it would have been done and how it might have been perceived differently. So we're going to kind of take that angle here instead of the same angle I took when I did the whole Split thing. But first things first, before we dive in, this is going to be talking about the Captain Marvel movie, and I'm going to be presenting my opinion on one of the biggest critiques I've heard about this movie, as far as people complaining about it, and also my opinion on why I think people actually didn't like this movie if they didn't like it, without maybe realizing that this is why they didn't like it and why it fell flat for them. So first things first, we're going to talk about one of the main criticisms that I've heard about this movie, which actually almost made me not want to see this movie. I actually put off seeing this movie because I assumed that people were right who were saying this, because I had seen the trailers and I had seen the poster, and from what I could tell from that, I'm like, yeah, it looks like they might be right. People were complaining that Brie Larson did a poor job acting this character and that she didn't have any emotional range. So she was a bit cardboard, kind of. And from the trailer, I assumed people were right because I didn't know what the story was. And after watching the movie, I was just beating my head against a wall because I'm like, I'm sorry if this is your opinion, but this is objectively wrong, this opinion. She did a great job as far as I was concerned. And I want to bring up why. I think it's less of an issue of bad acting and more of an issue of the common audience doesn't understand character development and like character context in the story. So let me ask you. So I am going to give you one more spoiler warning before we start, because I'm going to have quite a few spoilers here if you have not seen the movie. I wonder why a character. Sorry, that is a package being delivered. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. That was like my new clothes being delivered because I need clothes. But anyway, back to what I was saying. I wonder why a character wouldn't show a lot of emotions in a movie when it's established within the first 5 minutes of the film that she's spent the last 6 years essentially being brainwashed on a planet that tells her constantly, don't let your emotions get the best of you. Don't show emotions. Humor is a distraction. Like, quote unquote from the movie. So every time she cracks a smile, her mentor says, hey, don't show emotion. Don't do that. Gee, I wonder why the character wouldn't show emotion. It's like, that's actually good acting when an actor does things that make sense for the character to do in the context of a story. And also, if you would notice, once one last spoiler warning, because this is the big one, because this is the twist. Once she finds out that the people she's been fighting for are actually the bad guys, and that the people she's been killing and stuff are the good guys, and that she's actually a human, she's not Kree, she starts showing more emotion in the movie, because she starts kind of getting out of that mindset of, oh, I don't have to, I'm actually a human, this is normal for me, no wonder I do this all the time and I slip up and I smile occasionally and then they give me a hard time. I just don't get how people miss that has got to have been intentional. It makes total sense in the story that of course she'd be that way, and then as soon as she figured out she was human, she started showing more emotion, but of course she'd be in the habit, because she's essentially been brainwashed for 6 years, to not show a ton of emotion, because that's going to take some time to recover. So anyway, that was the main thing I wanted to address, that I just thought that was kind of a stupid complaint and a stupid reason to not like the movie, because if you even I feel like that has to have been a complaint from people who didn't actually watch the movie. Like people who were just, like I did, looked at the trailer and says, gee, she's not using a lot of facial expressions. It's like she's kind of cardboard. But in the context of the movie, it makes total sense. It is good acting to follow what a character would actually be like, considering the life circumstances and stuff. So I don't know why that's a complaint. Anyway, we're gonna move on to the second thing, which is why I think that a lot of people who didn't like the movie, and they don't even realize that this is why. So, and this is gonna be what kind of comes back to writing a little bit more. So this story is very obviously, when you watch the story, it's a plot embryo. Like that's what they used to outline this. It's like beat for beat plot embryo. And where the story kind of seemed to fall flat, and I think this is where people are subconsciously feeling like it wasn't satisfying, like the end wasn't satisfying, even though the end was fine. And I don't think this is actually something that's wrong with the movie. I think they just didn't pull it off in a way that hit people as hard as it needed to for it to feel satisfying. So in the plot embryo, you have a point where, so the characters want something. In this particular case, what she wants is to regain her memories and know what happened to her before 6 years ago, where she has these little snippets popping up. And she wants to know who this one person is that she keeps seeing, and who like this grand intelligence represents itself as when she sees them, because it's supposed to represent itself as the person she most admires, and the person that keeps appearing in front of her is somebody she doesn't know. She doesn't know them, but she knows she must admire them. And how plot embryo goes is that they want something. We're not gonna go through each of the beats, but we're gonna kind of go through the ones that are relevant to this. So she wants something, okay? And then she gets what she wants at a certain point in the story, which is part of plot embryo, and then pays a heavy price for getting what they want. Now, in this case, they tried to do the pays the heavy price by, I know what they did. They tried to do it by having her realize that this was a person who was, she gets her memories back, okay? She gets her memories back. She realizes this person was really important to her. They died tragically, and that's supposed to be that she's paying a heavy price. The problem is, it pays a heavy price for her. It hits her hard, because now that she knows who this person is and she has her memories back, and she realizes they're dead and how they died, that it hits her hard. The problem is it doesn't hit the audience hard, because we've already known since fairly early in the story that that person is dead. We've already gathered that it's obviously somebody from her past that was important to her. So we've already kind of processed that, and it doesn't hit us hard. It's not new information either. That person's been dead for like 6 years. So it's not a person who dies that we got connected to in the story. It's a person that we pretty much always knew was already dead. And I think that's why it wasn't that satisfying in the story in that aspect. One other thing that isn't really part of the plot embryo necessarily, but it is something that I've noticed is common. I think it's used in a different kind of outlining method where they commonly bring this up. But not the all is lost, but that's kind of how I think of it as, is she never, they make a big deal throughout the movie about how every time she gets knocked down, she gets back up. That's just her pattern life, because she's stubborn, and that's her character flaw, but it's also one of her biggest strengths, which is super interesting and a very good character flaw, good way to represent a character flaw. But there's a scene in the end, or very darn close to the end, where it's supposed to be the darkest hour of the story, and they show the flashbacks again of her getting knocked down multiple times throughout her life in these different situations, and then she gets knocked down in like real life in the situation. She gets knocked around by the one character, and then she gets back up. But the problem, and what I feel like they missed here, and I think this is another reason why the ending was not as satisfying as it could have been. Now, I don't think that this is necessarily a wrong way to tell a story. I just think that audiences are used to seeing this now, so then when they don't, even if they can't put their finger on it, because I've talked to a couple people who said they weren't wild about this movie. They thought it was okay, they thought it was entertaining, but they felt like it was missing something. They couldn't put their finger on it. When I told them, I think it was this and this, they're like, oh my gosh, yes, that is what it is. So they show her getting knocked down physically. They don't show her getting knocked down as far as her spirit actually being broken. She never gives up. She's being consistently stubborn. She never has a moment, sorry if my dog's barking, where we see that she has given up for even like a second and then been like, no, screw that. And she pulls herself up by the bootstraps and picks herself up. We see her getting knocked down physically and picking herself back up physically, but we don't see it on an emotional level. And I think that that's probably what they were going for, but they didn't quite depict it strongly enough for that to get across to the audience. And those are the things that I think would have been more easily represented in a book, if you were doing a book, because you can show, depending on what I'm trying to think, third person, first person, anyway, what perspective you're writing in. Depending on what perspective you're writing in, you can probably do an internal monologue, and you probably could have had her thoughts basically where she's thinking, I don't think I can do anything about this. I'm stuck, I can't do anything, and then saying, screw that, and then choosing to pick herself up. That would have been easier to represent in a book than on film, so I can see how that was hard for them to get across the way that they were intending. And I'm sure that they were intending to do that with the flashbacks of the situations where she was falling down and getting back up. It just didn't quite come across, and I think that's what a lot of people found fell flat. And I'm gonna actually compare that a little bit to another movie I just watched last night. A very, very different genre, very different type of movie. And I'm gonna give you a spoiler warning for this too. So the new Mary Poppins movie, spoilers. In the new Mary Poppins movie, they did that very well. They did the characters gave up at a certain point. They thought they were doomed. They were screwed. There was no situation that could help them. They were just gonna have to deal with it. This came in the moment where basically the Bankses are packing up their house. The house is emptied. They basically are assuming they've got to be moved out, like they've lost. And then serendipitously something happens that, whatever. But you as the audience, when that happens, it feels so much more satisfying when they actually give up, because you see them give up and you say, no, don't give up. And you're sitting there and you're begging them, please, like, you can do this and stuff. But if they never have that give up moment, you don't have that panic, and then you don't have the relief, which is really fun and really rewarding in the ending of a book or a movie, in this case, of when they do have something good happen that brings them back from the brink of that after they had already given up. Even if it's just for a couple seconds, or they just had a moment of doubt where they thought they were screwed or something like that. That is much more satisfying than if somebody just gets physically knocked down, but they never kind of mentally break a little bit, or even just a smidge. And that's just to kind of give you an idea, because as the audience watching the Mary Poppins one, you're thinking, there's a little part of you, even though you're like, it's Mary Poppins, like, it's gonna be okay. But there's a little part of you thinking, it's like, oh dear God, what if the directors like felt like being artsy, and they're just like gonna have the message of, sometimes really bad things happen, but it depends on your perspective, and you have your family, so this is the thing that really matters, and then they actually lose their house. Like, you have that worry for a minute, but you don't have that when the characters don't have that breaking point. That's what it is. It's kind of like the breaking point is missing in Captain Marvel. That's what I was looking for. She doesn't have a breaking point. Like, she has a point where she could break, but she doesn't, like, at all. And usually in a breaking point, they do break a little bit, but then they kind of pull themselves back. And that's what we find really heroic, is that you could get to that bottom level. You could be as low as you can get, but you can still pull yourself up by the bootstraps. And it's encouraging. That's a message we like. We like to think that that's what we would be able to do in our own lives. So when they miss that, it doesn't feel as rewarding to us as the audience. We can't live vicariously through that as much, and we don't tend to identify with the character as much in that case. That can also be why some people have complained that it seemed like it was too easy for her in the movie. I think if they had included that little bit of a break, that probably would have solved that for a lot of people. But anyway, those are my two main things that I think just weren't pulled off as well as they could have. I don't think they were skipped entirely. I just don't think they were pulled off the way that the directors intended. And again, that's not a Brie Larson thing, because I know she's been catching a lot of criticism for stuff. That's not a problem with Brie Larson's acting. That is a writing issue. That is a storytelling problem. And even then, it's not really technically a problem. It's just that it wasn't audience's expectation, because by all means, like, screw with the formula if you're doing something like Plot Embryo, which is clearly what they used for this. Like, it's just like beat for beat. It's just that one of them they didn't hit very well, and then later on they didn't hit the other one very well either. But overall, I still thought it was a very entertaining movie. I actually really enjoyed it. I just think that if they had done those two things better than they did them and hit those a little bit harder, that it would have been a movie that was elevated to one of my favorite Marvel movies, instead of like somewhere out of the top 5 favorites. Like, I still liked it. It was still entertaining. The visuals were awesome. There were some hilarious moments, especially the one where they're asking him if he can turn into a filing cabinet. If you've seen the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about. I just thought that felt so real, like something that would really happen if this was a situation that was happening. And I was dying laughing. But anyway, I gotta wrap this up because we're already at like, oh gosh, I don't know, like 17 minutes or something. So this is too long. I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna let you go. Those are my thoughts on that subject of if this movie had been a book, these are the things that would have probably been the problem with the story. And yeah, anyway, you guys have a great night, and I hope you enjoyed that. Bye.